others may. But I have a mother who knows how to pray. There may be things I have missed in my youth, but I have a Father who stands for the truth. I have a goodly heritage. I'm blessed with things you can't see. I have a goodly heritage, and that is worth far more to me. And if in the future my parents pass on to dwell in that city we've learned to call home, they may not leave me the goods of this world, but I have accepted their God and His word. I have a goodly heritage. I'm blessed with things you can't see. I have a goodly heritage, and that is worth far more to me.
If you're able to sing that with them, you've been truly blessed. You may not have all the money in the world. You may not have all the goods of the world. But if you're able to sing that song, what a blessing that is this morning. If you got your Bibles, turn with me, if you would, to Genesis chapter number 26. And thanks again for being at church. I'll probably preach maybe a little bit differently than normal with the type of message that I have this morning, but we'll just want to mind the Lord and do what the Lord has for us today. Once you find your place in Genesis 26, if you'll stand, we'll read just a few verses. Now we're going to read a few verses at the front of the chapter, then we're going to jump over to a few verses around the middle of the chapter, and we're going to just read, 5, 6, 7 verses this morning. The Bible said there was a famine in the land beside the first famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went unto Abimelech, king of the Philistines, unto Gerar. And the Lord appeared unto him and said, Go not down into Egypt, dwell in the land which I shall tell thee of. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with thee, and will bless thee, for unto thee and unto thy seed I will give all these countries, and I will perform the oath which I swear unto Abraham thy father. And I will make thy seed to multiply as the stars of heaven, and will give unto thy seed all these countries, and in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because that Abraham obeyed my voice, and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. Now let's jump over to verse number 12. Then Isaac sowed in that land. What did he do? He minded the Lord. Then Isaac sowed in that land. Verse number 12. Then Isaac sowed in that land and received in the same year 100-fold. And the Lord blessed him. And the man waxed great and went forward and grew until he became very great, for he had possession of the flocks and possession of herds and great store of servants, and the Philistines envied him. For all the wells which his father's servants had digged in the days of Abraham, his father, the Philistines, had stopped them and filled them with earth. And Abimelech said unto Isaac, Go from us, for thou art much mightier than we are. Let's bow this morning for a word of prayer. Brother John, take this Lord in prayer if you would. Amen. Thank you for standing this morning. You can be seated. I believe one of the most influential people in children's lives, and you know, there's a lot of people that influence the lives of our kids, from teachers to Sunday school teachers to parents to grandparents to peers, and I mean, there's just a lot of people that influence our children and the children of this world. But I believe one of the most influential people in a child life is not only a father, but a father who is actively involved with their children. Now there is a difference. There is a difference. There's a lot of breadwinners in this world, and that's admirable. But I'm going to tell you, more so than just being breadwinners, it's a father who will provide for that means of his family, but will also spend time with his children. And I believe this, regardless of the occupation. I thought about this, occupations, right? There's all different kind of occupations around this. There's folk that work in an office. There's people that roll up their sleeves and they may do some kind of manual labor. There's just all kind of different fathers. And I'll say this morning before we go any further. I'm not interested so much as your occupation as I am your involvement. I'm not really interested. I don't think your occupation makes for a good father or a bad father, but I believe your involvement does. All right, now, so I begin to think about this. Regardless of the occupation, there's a great opportunity that every father has to shape or to mold their children. Now, it may be your children are older, but now grandchildren have come along in your life. We have an opportunity to shape and to mold the young people and the people around us that God has given us. I wrote this down. Oftentimes we see behaviors of children as a reflection of the way they are. Sometimes it's a positive reflection. Sometimes it's a negative reflection. I've seen children before that, man, they follow in the footsteps of dad. You've heard the illustrations, when they're walking in the snow, you see that young person walking in the footsteps of their dad and they're trying to be everything. And oftentimes what you'll see is this. They'll grow up in the home. They'll aspire for the same aspirations as dad. If you grow up in a Chevrolet household, a lot of times your children will be Chevrolet children. If you grow up in a Ford household, they'll be a Ford. Your children will be Ford people. If you grow up in a Dodge household, we'll pray for you. That was for you, Brother Chuck. Brother Chuck was sitting back there like that. And so you'll see that a lot. You'll see that. Here's what else you see. Sometimes their children will go on and they'll want to be of the same occupation. There's a lot of times that those who have built their own business, they'll turn that business over to the next generation of their children. If their children are electricians, a lot of times their children will come up and they'll follow in dad's footsteps. They started out going to work with him, making a little side money, and then all of a sudden they become to get better and better. Dad's a truck driver, whatever. So a lot of times you see that influence in a father's life. But a lot of times children will aspire, will desire to be the exact opposite of their dad. If their dad went to the right, they're going to want to go to the left. You say, preacher, why is that? Well, I think from a physical standpoint, sometimes we just have different interests. But from a spiritual standpoint and a morality standpoint, oftentimes the failures of the father will reflect in children who don't want to make the same mistakes. Then you also see this. You also see sometimes a father will spiral in the wrong direction, and that's all their kids know, and they'll follow that direction of the father. And so either way you want to look at it, a father has influence. A father has influence. And when you come to this portion of Scripture here, you find here that a father had some influence on a son. A father had some influence on a son. Matter of fact, you see here a son who was greatly impacted by his father. Now, anything you know about Abraham, though he was wealthy, and though he had a lot of money, had a lot of possessions, but Abraham, he faced some king. Abraham wasn't a king. Abraham wasn't a king. Abraham didn't have the world status that some kings and dignitaries had, but yet Abraham had the blessings of God. God had prospered Abraham. God had blessed Abraham. God had made Abraham great. God had given a covenant to Abraham. But you know what Abraham was? Abraham was a well digger. He dug wells. You say, well, preacher, he had servants for it. I get that, but it was still his occupation. If Abraham would have had a modern day truck, can you imagine? He's driving down the road. Can you imagine what Abraham's well digging service? Now we laugh about that, but that's not something that a kid, what's your father? My dad's a lawyer. My dad is a doctor. My dad is a police officer. What's your dad do, Isaac? My dad digs wells. Wouldn't have been that of high prestige. Wouldn't have been that. You know, I remember, and this is a little carnal. Y'all bear with me. Y'all remember, I'm from West Virginia now. Y'all remember the song that Loretta Lynn's, I'm not condoning it, look up here. I'm proud to be a coal miner's daughter. Now, I couldn't sing that, but I could change the lyrics to a coal miner's son. But I think about that. I think about what it was like for Isaac to be out in the world. What's your dad do? Man, my dad is a well digger. But can I tell you something? I believe that aspect of Abraham's life made a tremendous impact on his son Isaac. I don't think that Isaac looked down his nose because his dad dug wells, but I think Isaac learned some valuable lessons that shaped Isaac into the man in which he came to be. Now, I want us to consider a few things, and I'll jump into it. You ready? In verses 1 through 5, we see that Isaac was a son who benefited from his father's obedience to God. Verses 1 through 5, you see it. What did God tell Isaac? He says in verse 5, because that Abraham obeyed my voice, kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my law. He said, I'm going to make your seed great because of the obedience of your father. I'm going to make your seed. You say, what is it? Isaac benefited from Abraham's obedience. Listen, you start obeying God, and whether your children make the decision to turn or to stay, they'll benefit from your decision to raise them in the nurture and admonition of the Lord and determine by the help of God, I am going to obey God. Isaac benefited from that. Verses 6 through 11, you're going to find out something else. Isaac struggled with some of the very same things that his dad did. 2 times Abraham lied about his wife. Y'all remember that? For fear. For fear. 2 times. Oh, no, she's my sister. Now, it was only a partial lie. She was his half-sister. But you know, partial truth is a whole lie. That's good preaching. Now, so you find here that Abraham struggled when it came to this aspect. He had some fears. And though Abraham obeyed God, he still had some weaknesses. Don't we the same as dads have some weaknesses? Man, we want to be good, godly people, but there's times that we stumble. And there's times we fall. And I find out here, and by the way, Isaac wasn't born yet when this happened to Abraham. But you find out that Isaac's going to go before in the same place, and he's going to do the exact same thing that Dad did. It's amazing how sometimes we can be wired like our parents, like our family. Sometimes it's just, we are sinners by birth. All right? We have a DNA that has been corrupted. All right, and so here, he had some issues. Now, you say, preacher, why is this important? Because I believe that ought to make us aware as dads and fathers and influences, hey, that just because, or since we struggle with some things, there's going to be some things that they struggle with, and we better make sure we get our stuff together. You ever heard the phrase, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree? Look right here at the apple. He doesn't fall far from the tree in verses 6 through verse 11. Verses 12 through 14, God prospered Isaac in the land. But in verse number 15 is really where we're going to use for our platform. In verse number 15, the Bible says this, for all the wells which his father's servants had digged, in the days of Abraham his father, look at it, the Philistines had stopped them and filled them with earth. Now you know what you're going to find in young Isaac's life? You're going to find some opposition. You say, preacher, what do you mean opposition? Isaac was not going to be able just to ride his daddy's coattails through life. Isaac wasn't just going to be able to go back to Dad's wells, and just because Dad dug some wells, we'll be able to drink fresh water from the wells that Dad had dug. No. Isaac was going to face some individual, personal opposition in his life. I'm going to tell you something. I want to give my children every opportunity that they have, but there's going to be a reality. They're going to have to face some opposition in their life. They're going to have to make their own choices. They're going to have to make their own decisions. But I want to give my children, I want to give my grandchildren the best opportunity that they have to follow the Lord. And so we see here that he's going to face some opposition. Now, though he couldn't make the choices for his son, Abraham laid some pretty good groundwork, didn't he? Abraham laid some pretty good groundwork. I think about all the dads who work hard, long hours, deal with the heat, stress, pressures of life, regardless of what kind of job you have. I found this out. A lot of times, those who do the kind of back-breaking labor, oftentimes they labor with the physical, and then they can go home. And then sometimes the people who may not labor with the physical, man, they've got a mental and a stressful load. And so regardless of what field that you work in, you deal with your own pressures and your own stresses of life, right? But I think about this. I think about all those hard-working dads who, after a long, hard day, come home with those same weighted shoulders or those same calloused hands, and will put work aside and will pick that child up and spend time with that young person and love them and nurture them and care for them. And I'll tell you this, listen, it's admirable to work a hard day's work, provide for your family, but it's above and beyond when you'll take care of that child and bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. You realize most of what the world focuses on is the financial ramifications? And I believe a father ought to take care of his family. Listen, I don't believe we ought to rely on the government. I don't believe we ought to rely on the church. I believe a dad ought to take care of his family. Everybody goes through hard times and difficult times. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. But I'm telling you this, a dad ought to supply for his family. But a dad in a Christian circle ought to rear his family in that nurture and admonition of the Lord. You realize that your children don't know work, Dad? They don't see you at work. You say, well, I put long hours in my children. I've worked and I've worked. They don't see any of that. You know what they see? They see Dad at home. That's what they see. They see Dad when Dad comes home and he's got time to fool with them and mess with them and carry on with them and help them and correct them. By the way, they need to see Dad correct him. It ain't your wife's job to raise your kid. Y'all raise the child together. Now you say, preacher, why would you say all that? Because I'm telling you, we need some dads who, yes, will go to work and work long, honest hours to provide for his family and give them what we need. But we also need some dads who will step up by the glory of God and by the grace of God and determine, I'm going to raise, my family is going to see a godly dad. My family is going to see a faithful dad. My family is going to see an obedient dad. Hey, the first thing I believe that Isaac saw, I'm getting way ahead of myself, but Isaac saw Dad at the altar long before Isaac saw Dad digging wells. Genesis 22. Isaac saw a father saw an earthly father who was looking up to his Lord and was willing to give everything that he had. Man, that's the kind of dads we need today. He was impacting his children. They're going to see the dad that influences his home. They're going to see the dad who's faithful to the house of God. They're going to see the dad who prays, the dad who reads his Bible, the dad that takes care of his wife, the dad that loves one. That's the dad they're going to see. I got a question. What kind of dad? What kind of influence are we? So, preacher, I'm not a dad. Hey, what kind of influence are you showing those around? Let me give you 2 or 3 things this morning. We'll go to the house. How important is it? Well, first of all, I believe that Isaac adopted his father's priorities. He did. Isaac adopted those priorities to his father. Now, remember, don't miss this. Every child's going to make their own decision, just like you did. You said, preacher, I had a sorry dad. I didn't have a godly heritage, and I determined by the grace of God, I wasn't going to raise my daddy was a drunkard. My dad was this, that, and the other. And I believe you still ought to honor them. There was things that they did. I believe you ought to respect them for what they did. But some people have said, listen, I'm not going to be that way. I'm going to be godly. I'm going to raise my children right. Whatever it might be. But I'm going to tell you something. A child will make their own decisions just like you did. But here, I find that Isaac adopted some of his father's priorities. Look down at verse number 18. And Isaac digged again the wells of water. You see that? Now what happened to the well? They've been stopped up. They've been stopped up. The people of Gerar got upset and they stopped the wells. They filled them with sand. And they said, listen, Isaac's not going to be blessed and Isaac's family's not going to be blessed. We're going to make sure of that. And the opposition came in verse 15, but you're going to find out that you can see the priorities of Isaac that he had adopted from his fathers, because the Bible said that he digged again the wells of water. Wells were important to Abraham. They were important. Thus, they became important to Isaac. You know, isn't it kind of ironic that the things that you make to be a big deal in your life are going to be the things that your children make to be a big deal in their life, especially while they still live at home. The things that you make your priorities. And by the way, your priorities are not always what comes out of your mouth. That's what comes out of your life. You can tell your kids you love God all you want to, but if you're not faithful to God, they're going to see where your priorities really lie. Your kids aren't stupid. Your kids aren't stupid. Give your kids some more credit. They see those things. Young people around here, they're not ignorant. They see through those things. By the way, there's testimony after testimony of fathers that said, I wish that I could go back and undo some things. There's some things I wish I could go back and change. There's some things that I wish I could go back and redo. But we can't go back and redo them, so we better start now and go forward. What's important to Abraham became what's important to Isaac. The well was a way that Abraham provided physically for the needs of his family. You say, what is it? Well, families need water, flocks need water, employees need water. I mean, it was something they couldn't live without, just like finances. We got to have finances to live, okay? We need a house, we need food, we need a roof over our head. All right, we need transportation, we need all of these things, okay? Whose responsibility is that? That's a father's responsibility. I think we need some examples of some good men. I think our children need to look up and say, hey, who's a hard worker? I can tell you right now, my dad's a hard worker. I can tell you, I've watched my dad come home exhausted, and then he takes care of the house, and he takes care of us, and he does all. Well, we need some examples of what a real man really is. You ever turned on TV? Can you imagine what it's going to be like in 20 years? I can't imagine a kid coming home and his dad's got pink hair and a skirt on. You say, well, preacher, you're meddling. I'm not meddling, but I'm going to tell you, our kids need to see what a man is. There's no shame in our society is trying to emasculate everything. Kids need to see an example. This is what a man is. This is what a man does. And by the way, I believe a real man will take care of his wife. I believe he'll do that. But they need to see a good example of a good man. But not only that, the illustration here extends beyond the physical. And I believe that you and I can make application to that, which would turn into spiritual. Not only do our kids need to see a good example of a real man when it comes to the physical thing, but our children need to see example of godly men. Godly men who are not afraid to pray, men who are not afraid to get on their face, men who are not afraid to lift up their hands and praise a holy God for being good. I can promise you this, Isaac saw that with his dad. Genesis 22 again, can you imagine what Isaac witnessed? Hey, listen, as Abraham began to worship God for sparing his son, I don't believe Abraham was embarrassed to praise God. I don't believe Abraham was embarrassed to thank God. I don't believe Abraham was embarrassed when he went back down the mountain and he told his servants, boys, let me tell you what, listen, Abraham loved God and he wasn't ashamed of it. Man, we need some examples of godly dads. Let me give you something else and we'll move. Notice the difference between Abraham and Lot. I was reading, it just kind of maybe jumped out of the page at me. Abraham dug wells to get his water. All right, to get what? He got it from the depths. Where did Lot go? The Bible said that Lot looked toward Sodom at well-watered plains. Abraham got his water from the deep thing. Lot got his off those little surface dews that fell. Let me ask you this. Where is it that we're leading our children to? You see, Lot got the convenient water. Lot got that came of a morning, dissipated of the afternoon. Oh, it come of a morning, and then it went away. Hey, listen, where is it? And by the way, you can see the priority. That's what we're talking about. The priority of Isaac versus the priority of Lot's children. They adapted the priorities. Now, we'll see Isaac in his actions here just later on. But we know the account of Lot and his daughters, don't we? Man, they wanted the surface pleasures. They wanted the easy things. They wanted the easy, convenient relationship. Man, it cost them. I thought about this, and they were singing it, you know. One of the lyrics in that song says, I'm blessed with things you can't see. When you dig wells for your children, spiritual wells if you would, there's things that can only be seen that are so evident. But there's things in your family that go below the surface. There's things, deep things of God. And they learn what's real and they learn what's on the surface. On the surface, the surface of a well, people walk by and say, oh, that's a well. But the contents can't be seen, except for by a choice few who had actually done the digging. We live in a day that they bring out a big drill, drop those bits, and they change the bits and keep going down. That's not how they dug them back then. They hand dug. Man, they was down in that well digging, and down in that well digging. And they'd start out here, and before long, they was here, and they was digging. And they was digging. Before long, they was down here, and they were digging. You say, what happened? Nobody else on the surface could see what they were digging for, but when they got to the bottom of the well, they knew what was there. Man, the depths, and it affected Isaac. Isaac adopted his father's priorities. Wells are important to Abraham. He dug them as he went through different lands and sojourned in different land. Because they were important in Abraham's life, Isaac grew to appreciate, and they became important in his life. Can I ask you this, and I'll move? What are the priorities that we're teaching the next generation? I'm not talking about what we're talking about. What are the priorities that we're really teaching them? I can tell you where you can find your priorities. Look at your activities. Look at your practices. Look at what you make a big deal out of. And I'm telling you, listen, Isaac adopted his father's priorities. Second of all, I believe the practice of the father better paved the way for the success of his son. The practice of the father better paved the way for the success of the son. You say, preacher, what are you talking about? Go back to verse number 18. He said, and Isaac digged again the wells of water which they had digged in the days of Abraham his father, for the Philistines had stopped them after the death of Abraham, and he called their names after the names by which his father had called them. So basically what happens, Isaac goes back in and he takes back over the wells and he puts the Abraham's name back on them, gets the carnality out of them, and he does some things where they had corrupted them. Now we said previously that Isaac was going to have to make his own choices, right? And that's true. But the practice and the effort of Abraham would make these choices, listen to this, simpler for Isaac. You say, well, preacher, where do you get that? Verse 18 says, and Isaac, look at this phrase, digged again. Now, that means he redug. Okay, y'all need to know what that says in the Hebrew. He digged again the wells which his father's servants had digged. You say, well, what are you talking about? Preacher, how did his actions better pave the way? Aren't we always saying, I want what's best for I don't want my children to go through the same struggles that I go through. Well, there's a couple things that I believe that it helped him. First of all, it allowed Isaac to know where to find the water. How do you know? Dad already found it there. Dad already found the water there. I know there's water down. I know it worked. Can I tell you something by the help of the Lord? Our children need to know that we have something that works. Our children need to know that we serve a God, that Dad serves a God that answers prayer, that Dad serves a God that meets our needs, that Dad serves a God that's worthy of our worship. And our children, when they go through the dry times and the difficult times in their life, need to be able to go back and say, I believe that I'm going to dig right here. This is where Dad dug down. This is where Dad got water. And if Dad got water from here, and if Dad got from some refreshment from here, and if Dad got some help from here, I believe I can get some water. I believe I can get some help. I believe I can get some refreshment. You say, why did it help him? Because he knew where water was from. And I don't want my children to go through life trying to figure everything out. I want to give them a foundation to where they know, hey, I may not know it all, but I know the foundation's right. I know there's water there. There might not be water over on the other side of the wilderness, but I know there's water right there. There might not be water on the backside of there might not be. God said, don't go to Egypt. By the way, go to Genesis 12, verse number 10, and you can find out that God, I'm getting way ahead of myself, but you can find out that God told Isaac the same thing. He made Isaac a sojourner. Do you know that? He made Isaac a sojourner during a famine. Genesis 12 was the famine that Abraham talked about, or that Abraham went through, that the Bible was talking about here in Genesis 26. You go on down the same verse and God says, listen, He said, Abraham, He said, there's a famine, and Abraham went to Egypt. God tells Isaac right here, don't go to Egypt. He's got his own battles to face and his own walk of life to do. But He said, I tell you what, Isaac, there's water here. Why? Your dad dug there. So I began to think about that. He knew where the water was. Your children's going to be able to see the works in your life. They're going to be able to recognize where the blessings come from. They're going to be able to recognize, oh, there's difficulties, but they're going to be able to recognize where your confidence was at. He knew, man, there's water there because Dad found water there. But the second thing I thought of is a little more practical. It's a little more simple for me. Now we're talking about how did his actions pave the way for Isaac. Well, number one, it allows Isaac to know where there was water. Second of all, it's much easier to dig in soil that's already been dug in. Try it. Try it. You say, preacher, I ain't never dug a hole in my life. Get you a shovel. That's good practice. Go out there when it's dry. And I'm talking about when you stick that shovel in and it feels like it's going to bend the tip of that shovel. But then you go out there and you find where somebody else has already dug. Man, the ground has already broken up a little bit. The ground has already been broken. Sometimes the ground is a little more moist. And you begin to put that shovel in and somebody's went ahead of you and broke up some rock that's been in there. Somebody swung that mattock and somebody swung that pick before you got there, and it broke up some of the difficulties of your digging. And though digging's still hard, though it was still, they had to still sweat, and though it was still dug by the sweat of their brow, it was easier for them because Dad had already been there doing the digging beforehand. Let me tell you, if I want it to be better for my children are going to face struggles. Your children's going to face struggles. Your grandchildren are going to face spiritual battles. But by the help and by the grace of God, if we can go ahead and dig now, it'll help them when they come back and start digging later. The ground is softer where it's already been dug. Hey, there's some battles I don't want my children to fight. I want them to be settled by the time they get to be adults. I want there in their mind, there's no question about this, that I'm not wavering on this. I'm settled, I'm solid. Somebody else has done dug the hole. Somebody else has done found the water. Somebody else has done laid the foundation. And though the world's tried to cover it, though the world's tried to erase it, I'm just going to dig right there where my father had already been digging, and the ground will be softer for him than it was for you. If you really want to make things better for your children, then go ahead and dig some holes now. Go ahead and dig in some foundations now. Go ahead and put the work in and the effort in, and it'll pay off one day later on down the road. Third thing I want you to see this morning, and I'm done. Look at the progression of the son. God said, go. God, don't go to Egypt. Sojourn right here. He said, well, there's some wells that my father, and we're going to need water. I mean, water's vital. Water was important to Dad, and how did Dad provide for his family? Dad found water, and I'm going to go back to where Dad found the water, and I'm going to use that same water to provide for my family. Aren't you glad the water's still good? Aren't you glad the same water that satisfied Abraham is the same water that satisfied Isaac? But look at the progression, because you know what's going to happen? Before long, you're going to have to step out of the nest. Your children are going to have to check out of your house, and they're going to be their own man. One of the hardest things is watching your children grow up and watching them leave. You know why? Because you don't only watch their successes, you also watch their failures. Can't imagine what Mom and Dad went through. They raised a dumb kid. You not only watch their successes, you not only watch their accomplishments, but you watch their failures. You watch their struggles. But man, as the Lord began to answer prayer and the Lord begins to show them the way, you know what they're doing? They begin to dig some holes on their own. You can't always dig in the same places. You can't always fight. You see, there's other battles, there's other fields, there's other difficulties that they'll have to encounter. Oh, you've laid the foundation. You say, oh, there's always going to be water here. Here's the blessing, but you're going to have to go out and dig some on your own. If you look at verse 19 down through verse number 25. The Bible says this. They'd run him off, remember? They'd run him out of town. You can't stay here. We're afraid of you. You go on somewhere else. And in verse number 19, the Bible said, and Isaac's servants digged in the valley and found there a well of springing water. How'd they find it? They had to dig for it. They had to dig for it. He'd done his own digging. Once he was out of the house, he made his own decision. You know what he said? He said, if digging was good enough for Dad, then digging will be good enough for me. If digging worked for my father, then digging will work for me. And boys, listen, we had a new place, but we've got all of this that God's blessed us with. We got to be able to provide for them. We got to be able to satisfy. He said, listen, start digging. Where do you start? One shovel at a time. One shovel at a time. They didn't just walk in and take over somebody else's well. You're going to see that that's what happens to some. No, they had to dig on their own. They had to dig on their own. The second thing I want you to see, he was persistent in his own priorities. In his own priorities. Now in verse 20 down through verse number 22, you know what you're going to find out? You're going to find out that he, again, faced some opposition. Not only did he have to face some opposition and fight some old battles, the same battles that his dad had to fight, but now he had to encounter some new battles. You saw what was it? He got a well dug and they'd come and They get in an uproar and say, oh no, that's our well. And then he'd go and he dug another well. They say, oh no, that's our well. You say, what's happened? That's exactly the way the world works. They try to ruin the hard work that you do. They try to ruin the accomplishments that you make. But it did not stop Isaac. What did he do? He just kept digging wells. Makes you wonder, man, how many wells, Isaac, were you willing to dig? I believe he'd have said this, as many as it takes. Can I ask you something, Dad? How many wells are you willing to dig? Preacher, every time I dig a well and give my children, they go wrong or they make this decision or somebody comes along, man, there's the influence of the educational system. There's the influence of the medical world. There's the influence of the gut. Hey, keep digging. Don't stop digging the wells that they need. Find the water. The blessings of God are there. Don't quit. And you'll find out that Isaac was persistent. One of the greatest, I think, or a valuable trait or asset or a quality of anybody is just consistency. Just the same. Just the same. Not up and down. I'm just going to quit digging. Here's my shovel. You can have it. No. Just consistent. The Bible said that his consistency paid off. What happened? Well, he finally got to a place that they just left him alone. And he dug. And I wonder if they just looked at him and said, you know what? There ain't no hope for Isaac. He's just going to keep digging wells. I'm tired of messing with him. And wouldn't it be nice if the world got to places they just said, I ain't going to mess with them. They're not changing. They're not wavering. He's a well digger for life. He's just going to dig wells. His daddy dug wells. I shouldn't expect anything different. But they got to the place that he was just persistent. But I like this. You know that in verse number 24, look what he says. And the Lord appeared unto him the same night. When he finally struck water and they left him alone, God shows up. The Lord showed up. And said, by the way, isn't it good that he was faithful even when he felt like he was 1,000 miles away? Isn't it good? You see, sometimes we're faithful when we see we got all the warm and fuzzy. Everything's going well. Hey, but when the enemy approached and when those outsiders, and it may have seemed like that God was 1,000,000 miles away, he just kept digging and he kept remembering his father's faithfulness. And the Bible said, and the Lord appeared unto him the same night and said, I am the God of Abraham thy father. Look at it. Fear not, for I am with thee, and will bless thee, and will multiply thy seed for my servant Abraham's sake. I wonder if Isaac ever said, God, you sent me here. I've uncovered all the dad's wells, and then they run me out of town. And God, I'm trying to do right. God, I'm trying to keep digging. God, I'm trying to provide for my family. But God, they just keep coming and coming and coming. God, where are you at? And you know what God reminds him? He said, listen, I'm the God of your father. But he also said, I'm also your God. He renewed that covenant. God didn't break the covenant, but He gave it also to Isaac. You remember the Abrahamic covenant that was going to pass down Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Can I tell you, He renewed it, or He reassured, I guess, Jacob. It's interesting to note to me that not only did he know how to dig wells, but he also knew how to build altars. I wonder who taught him that. You see, I believe that his dad, though his dad may have been a well digger, I believe that he was a God worshiper. See, preacher, what would you make you think that? Genesis 22. I've referred to that 2 or 3 times in my message, Genesis 22. Where did he learn to build an altar? Where did he learn to worship God? I believe he watched his dad learn to worship God. I believe he learned to watch his father worship God. And when God showed up and God appeared, you know what he did? He built an altar and worshiped God. And the Lord appeared unto him. In verse number 25, and he builded an altar there and called the name of the Lord and pitched his tent there. And there Isaac's servants digged a well. What did they do? They just kept digging. You know what they were? Consistent. Now I like this. You go down, you're going to find the dialogue. Those two that run Isaac out of town, they come back and said, hey, listen, we want to make a truce. We's wrong. We see the blessings of God on you. Now while all this was happening, you know what was happening? Isaac's servants were still digging. Isaac's servants are in that well, man, they're digging. Isaac's going on. Isaac's taking care of other things. And while it's on the backside, it's behind the scene, Isaac's servants are digging. They make the deal. They make the concord, if you will. They fix a meal. They prepare a meal. And after that, Isaac's servant said, Isaac, we found water. You say, why? You keep digging long enough. Listen, you're going to find water. You're going to find water. Keep digging. Don't stop. Don't stop influencing. Don't stop trying to make a difference. Just keep digging. You say, preacher, what does it say? It wasn't just a phase in Isaac's life. I'm done. But I'm telling you what we need. We need some dads who that living for God is not just a phase. It's not going to fade out. Oh, man, 2, 3, 4 years, and then it's, well, I'm just going back to it. No. We need some dads that it's their lifestyle. It's real. Can I tell you something? It wasn't just a phase. He didn't quit when it got hard. He didn't quit when it was no longer convenient. It wasn't just a phase in Isaac's life. It was a lifestyle. There's some interesting facts about the influence of wells. You say, why was a well so important? You realize that where Isaac's wife was first encountered was at a well. Remember the story? Went and got her. Where was she? She's at a well. Isaac had a son, had 2 of them, named Jacob and Esau, that we're particularly... The Bible says here that in this chapter that Esau got married to 2 women, and it was a struggle on Isaac and his wife. But Jacob got a wife. Well, Jacob got 2, but he got swindled into one of them. You remember he had Leah that was tender-eyed? I'll tell you what that means after service if you really want to know. But then he loved Rachel. You know where his servant first found Rachel? He found her at a well, watering her father's flock. I'm going to tell you something. If we can keep our children close to the well, I believe it'll benefit them for their life. If we can just keep them to the well, why? There's water there. There's blessing there. There's provision there. I don't believe Esau found his by the well. Look how that turned out. But Isaac got his by a well. Jacob got his by a well. Listen, I want my children, I want my grandchildren, I want them to know the blessings of God and the value of staying close to God. And how's that going to happen? I'm going to have to be willing to dig. Can I ask you in closing this morning as you stand, what are you digging? What well?